Want to become a great engineer? Well, you need a lab, and you need good labs, and you need someone to guide you through those labs. In this episode, I explain what a lab is and why it's critical to becoming a strong engineer. Whether you're new to the industry or mid-career, you need a lab, so keep listening.
Do you want a career in cybersecurity? Are you unsure how to start? Curious what it means to be a cybersecurity professional? This is the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast with Dr. Jeff Colburn. He's a 30-year industry professional and the founder of Team Caveo, a company that specializes in helping people launch cyber careers. Join us on this podcast as we explore what it means to be a cybersecurity professional and how to get started. Welcome to the show.
Not sure if a cyber career is for you? Are you looking to get started? Are you looking to grow your career? Are you feeling stuck and don't know where to begin? My Get Good Fast coaching will help you quickly grow as a cyber professional. I can help you become a great engineer in months rather than years. It doesn't matter if you're new to the industry or mid-career. I coach you through that same process that has worked for me and my students. Go to coaching.cyberjobhacks.com to schedule your session today, or just follow the link in the show notes. Welcome to the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeff Colburn. Well, you may have heard me talk about labs, right? And, oftentimes when we hear the word lab, we're thinking scientific laboratories and they're conducting experiments. Well, that's not too far off the mark, right? So in IT, we use labs to test device configurations, any new features that might be coming out, new software. We test it, right? We want to test it before we put it into production, right? So that's where we experiment, right? So it's not too far from you see those images of a lab in movies. Well, similar IT, we need an environment where we can experiment, we can test things, we can see how it works before we put it into a production environment, right? The last thing you want to do is test something for the first time in production environment, right? You could take down the entire network. If you're doing something security-wise, you're trying something on your firewalls or just anything, you don't want production to be the first time you try it, right? Because it could very simply create problems, and then it could impact the availability of a network or the data or information. So that's why we have labs, right? So, this is what companies do, right? So, you could be, company could have a lab, right? They say, hey, we want to test it in the lab. We're going to upgrade code on our devices. We need to test that in the lab before we put it in production, right? So, but it's not just with companies. Their labs are equally important as you grow as an engineer, right? So you might have access to a lab at work, and you might learn how to, implement new features or technology for your company, and you do it in your company lab. Or, you could be at home and you're just trying to become a stronger engineer. You're trying to learn skill sets that you may not necessarily have access to at your company, right? Say you're trying to grow to the next level. You really don't have the opportunity at work to work on these newer technologies or to learn these newer technologies because it's outside the area of responsibility, or it's just not something your company has access to. So you might have it at home, and you build it in your home lab, and you're trying, you can become that better engineer, that stronger engineer. And most great engineers spend hours labbing technology, just countless hours, not just studying the technology, but setting up in the lab, understanding how it works, And that's the fun part, right? You can sit there and you can read and look at people's diagrams and books and try to understand how the technology works. But until you actually put it in a lab environment and you see how it works, right, that's when it gets fun. And if you're in this industry, it's not just to learn about technology, it's to implement technology. I think some of the greatest senses of fulfillment or satisfaction I've had in this career is when something I designed and implemented works, right? To actually see it working, right? That's what gives you that excitement, and that's what kind of draw you into the industry to begin with. It's not just being someone who knows a lot of stuff about technology. It's about somebody who actually knows how it works and how to implement it, and more importantly, when it doesn't work, how to figure out why it's not working. So that's why labbing is so, that's why we need labs. That's why we lab, and that's what a lab is, right? So like I said, it's not good enough. It's not good enough just to read about technology. And there are engineers out there, right? They study and they read about technology, but they never touched it. They never implemented it. And we have a name for these people. They're called paper engineers. And this is something you never want to become. You don't want to become a paper engineer. And these are people who just studied the material for the exam blueprint. They just study enough so that they can pass the certification exam. Or worse, they downloaded like an exam dump and memorized it, right? So they don't even know why their answers are correct. They just downloaded the exam dump, memorized it, took the test, and they have the certification, right? And that's horrible. Because they're clueless when it comes to implementing technology. And believe me, we spot them a mile away. You get them into a technical interview, they get torn apart because they don't know anything. They memorize stuff, but they don't know how to put it all together, right? And that's what IT is about. It is like getting things, bringing it together, getting the word together. And if you just memorize a bunch of terms, it's not going to make any sense when it comes to implementation. So usually paper engineers are weeded out early during the technical screening. And honestly, they're bad for the industry, right? Because they really dilute the value of certifications. Because really certification is meant to validate your skill set. Not only do you know the technology, but you know how to implement the technology. And I'll give vendors some credit. They're trying to get better at trying to just go beyond multiple choice answers on their exams. But, these engineers are still out there. And yeah, unfortunately, they can give certifications a bad name. But believe me, you still want to get certified, but you want something behind your certification. You just don't want to be someone who memorized everything to pass the exam. And that's the reason, like my students, they spend 2 hours labbing for every hour I lecture. So I might talk about something for an hour, a certain technology, a certain feature, and then they spend 2 hours in a lab making it work, right? I want them to see how it works, right? I want, and more importantly, I want them to experience the frustration when it doesn't work, right? Because oftentimes when we first configure something, we may miss something and it doesn't come up right away, right? So you get that frustration. Why is it not working? You're going back through your configurations. You're going from between devices. Why is it not coming up, right? So you learn how to troubleshoot, right? And this is what's really going to deepen your understanding of this technology, because you start understanding what is going on, right? Well, how this feature or technology works, because you're troubleshooting it. Like things are not happening the way you thought it was going to happen. So you have to dig in deeper to figure out, why is it not working? All right. And I want them, right? I want them to know what the device is doing, right? Instead of just memorizing the commands to make it work. And wow, there are engineers out there that they can tell you all of the commands to bring up OSPF or to configure a trunk, but they don't know what it takes for OSPF to come up, right? They don't know how truly that neighbor is established between routers, or, if I configure a trunk, what is it? Like I had somebody tell me how to configure a trunk, but they don't even realize what a trunk is doing versus versus a regular access port, right? So that's what I want my students, all right? I want them to know what the device is doing. I just don't want them to just know what command they need for that feature. And by labbing it, that's where you get that experience, right? And that's why every engineer should have access to a lab, right? It could be the home lab, it could be a lab at work, or it's a cloud-hosted lab, right? You need a lab. But having a lab isn't enough, right? So you need a lab, and I'm sorry if this is going to sound confusing. So you need a lab, but you also need good labs. And what do I mean by good labs, right? So the lab is the network devices, and these could be hardware, this could be virtual, right? This is the thing, right? This is your lab. And the lab is used to build your labs, right? Plural, right? And it's the labs that help you grow your skill set, right? So what is the difference, right? So the lab, like I said, is the hardware, either, the network device is either hardware or virtual. But then you have the labs, and the labs are usually a combination of topology diagrams and written requirements, right? You're to complete the lab, right, is you have to configure the technology so it matches that desired topology and it meets the requirements, right? And the labs really are written based upon skill level. So like entry-level labs are pretty straightforward, right? It might say, create an 802.1q trunk between switch 1 and switch 2 and only permit VLANs 10 and 20, right? So it pretty much spells out what the requirement is. You just have to know, well, how do I build a trunk and how do I restrict it to just VLANs 10 and 20, right? It's pretty straightforward, entry level. But then you get the more advanced labs, right? It gives a more general requirement, and you need to determine what technologies or features will meet that requirement, right? So just kind of to build on that previous example, right? The requirement might say, well, accounting and HR have users in building 1 and building 2. And accounting is on one IP subnet and HR is on another IP subnet. And from this requirement, there's going to have to be layer 2 stretch between the two buildings, right? Because, accounting's on one subnet, but they're in two different locations, right? So what you would have to do in a more traditional approach would be to configure that 802.1q trunk between the switches in building 1 and 2, right? So you have to kind of take that requirement and read into it to figure out what the technology is versus entry level, which pretty much tells you what you need to do. But that's how the labs are written. So if you're already an engineer, you may be able to develop your own labs. Like, so example, this weekend, I've been working on BGP, EVPN, VXLAN, right? So I built a VXLAN fabric on my home lab, and I wanted to test L2 VNI and L3 VNI connectivity. So, I developed my own lab. I came up with my topology, and my requirements were pretty simple at this point, right? I just wanted to test the connectivity. Now, because I'm going deeper into VXLAN, I'll continue to expand on this lab because I want to test other features. But I have that ability because I've been an engineer for so long that I can build my own labs. And others, if you're already an engineer, you may already know how to develop your own labs. But if you're starting out, you need access to good labs. And so where do you get them? Like where, I know I need a lab. I know I need good labs to practice. So where do I get them, right? So you can purchase labs. And if you're going to buy labs, make sure they're from a reliable source, because a lot of people out there are writing labs. You'll see like CCNA level labs, but you got to make sure they're from a reliable source, because just because somebody's selling a lab, they could be prone with errors. It's just make sure you buy labs, make sure they're trusted. Other people are praising them, saying these are great labs. Just don't buy them anywhere. The other way you get access to good labs is you take a course. So normally a good course will include labs. If the course doesn't include labs, then you want to rethink that course, because if it's just a course teaching you a bunch of theory and doesn't have any practical exercises, I probably would not recommend taking that course. You want something that's going to include labs. Like for me, I've been developing labs for my students for over 10 years, right? I've been helping them learn basic routing and switching. And my labs coincide with my lectures. Like I said, I'll lecture on something for an hour, and then there's a lab that they have should only take them a couple hours to complete to really reinforce everything I discussed in that lecture. So that they learned about it from me talking about it, whiteboarding it, but then they jump on the equipment, and then they have to actually make it work, right? They have to get in there and configure it, troubleshoot it, and at the end of the day, verify that everything's working, right? But then again, right? So you need a lab, you need good labs, but even that's not good enough. That's not good enough, right? How are you going to check your labs? So how are you going to verify that they're correct? So you have these great labs, but if you don't know how to verify if you configured it properly, or what if it doesn't work? How are you going to figure out why it's not working? Like say, hey, I got these labs, I've been working on them for a few hours, still can't get it to work. Where do you go for help? All right. So, some labs, they might include that final configuration, right? So you can kind of compare it. Well, this is how they say it should be configured. And, okay, so I'll make sure that I have this configuration and it should work. Right. And that's good. But where's the explanation? It's like, okay, well, those are the correct commands, right? Because that's what I'm doing. I'm looking at configuration. I'm looking at a bunch of commands. But why that command? What's the reason for that command, right? Unless they provide a written explanation, you don't know why it's configured this way, right? And sometimes there's different ways to configure things, but there's industry's best practice, right? So are they going to explain why this is industry best practice, right? So, you need to understand why things are configured a certain way, right? So you really, if you want to get good, you want to become a good engineer, you need someone that's going to help you on your journey, right? And that's someone that they can provide you great labs, and they're going to help you understand how it's configured and why it's configured that way. Like, so in my class, right, I go station to station, assisting my students, right? So I'll be one student, another students raising their hands, right? So I'm moving pretty much a whole lab time. There's no idle time. I'm constantly moving between my students, right? But I'm not only helping them troubleshoot when it doesn't work, right? When it does work, I want them to understand what's going on, like why it's working, what is going on, what's the technology doing, so they can understand what they just built. They just didn't type a bunch of commands. It worked. I can ping between this station and that station. Oh, great. Let's wrap up and call it a day. No, they need to understand what is going on, why that ping from host A is able to reach host B. And if they don't understand that, then the point of the lab is wasted, right? So it can't just be, these are the right commands and it works. No, I need to implement this technology, and these are the commands that permit me to do that, right? So they need to understand the technology. And that's what you need to be a good engineer or a great engineer. You got to understand the technology. Just don't memorize the commands, right? So that's what I'm starting to do now. And now I'm bringing on online students, right? Because I want that same experience. Not only do I want to teach them basic routing and switching, right? I want them to understand through labs how it works. I want them to experience it. I want them to really have that deep understanding of the technology, both from theory and practical. So, let's summarize, right? So just kind of let's wrap this episode up. Right. So in order to grow as an engineer, you need access to a lab. And once you have that lab, you need good labs. However, you need someone to help you work through those labs. You need to know how it's configured and why it's configured that way. If you want to get good labs. So I hope you found this helpful. And if you're interested in becoming one of my students, please schedule a time for us to discuss your career goals, what you want out of your IT career or your cyber career. Go to coaching.cyberjobhacks.com, schedule that time with me. We can kind of talk about where you're at, where you want to be, and how I can help you, as by becoming one of my students. Or, the same, you can click it in the show notes. There's a link in the show notes if you want to schedule that time with me. So I hope you found this helpful. So until next time, have a great week. Do you want to be part of an online community of like-minded people? Join us at cyberjobhacks.com, where you'll receive the latest industry news, cybersecurity career trends, invitation to free events, and exclusive offers. So join our private Facebook group at cyberjobhacks.com.
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please share with a friend who may be interested in becoming a cyber professional. Also, please leave a review on Apple Podcast. Your feedback is greatly appreciated, as it will shape our future episodes. Meet us here every Monday as we discuss the cyber job market and how to launch your career. Until next time, have a great week.